Hello, this is Bea Marshall, and I am the founder of Yes Parenting. You can read the things that I write at www.beamarshall.com, and you can use the hashtag Yes Parenting combined. So one of the things that I have started doing is experimenting with Google Plus Hangouts because I really want to find a way that makes it really possible to talk with you all about Yes Parenting and to answer your questions without you having to spend hours trawling through my website. So I put an invitation out on Instagram and Facebook, and I said to people, what are your questions about Yes Parenting? Because I would love to answer them. So I received a question, which was, what happens when the request from your child is much more potentially dangerous than seeking candy for breakfast? The media loves this idea that my children, I say yes to ice cream for breakfast or candy for breakfast, and I do, and I have no problem with that, because my reality, and I know this from many other families that practice the same thing, is that children don't actually want candy or ice cream for breakfast every day. So yes, parenting is not permissive parenting. I'm just put that out there now. So I'm going to respond to this question about what happens when your child's request is potentially dangerous. And I've got a few reflections that I've had as I've thought about how best to talk to you about this. And the first is that I believe that absolutely every single behavior that we as humans do, so not just children, adults as well, has a positive intention. So it doesn't matter how awful the behavior seems to be, behind that behavior there is a positive intention. And when I first came across that concept, I struggled with it a bit. And the more I thought about it and the more that I explored and started to understand about nonviolent communication and neurolinguistic programming, and other technologies that have kind of become part of what is now Yes Parenting, I really started to see this very clearly for myself, and then observing my children, and now with the people around me. So when a child makes a potentially dangerous request, the first thing is just to take a moment to realize that behind that request is a positive intention. And these positive intentions, first and foremost, are about us trying to meet our own needs. So babies cry, and babies cry to say something's not right in my world, and I need you, my parent, to meet whatever the need is that I have so that my world is right again. And as we get older, we continue to try and communicate about the needs that we have and that they need meeting. But the way that we parent in the Western world doesn't always hear those attempts to communicate unmet needs. So what happens is, without the right kind of vocabulary or the right ways to communicate, we use different behaviors to try and meet those needs instead. So when a child comes with a potentially dangerous request, I would first be thinking, okay, what's the positive intention behind this request? What's the need that they're trying to meet? Is it a need for adventure, for excitement, for connection? Is it a need for attention? Like, what is that need? Because that need is just a genuine human need. It is neither right nor wrong. It is a need that needs meeting. And as a parent, I want to, depending on the age of my child, I want to meet their needs. And as they get older, I want to help them learn how to meet their own needs and take responsibility for that process. So firstly, every behavior has a positive intention behind it, and that intention is about looking to meet a need. So secondly, I would respond to their request with a question. Yes, parenting is not always about just saying yes to everything. That's what's known as permissive parenting, I suppose. So instead of saying no, which might be the habitual response or the kind of the reaction inside, I might say, oh, that's really interesting. Why is it you want to do that? What is it about this thing that you've just asked me about that's interesting to you? What appeals to you about it? How would you make it happen? As soon as you start asking questions to your child, you open up a conversation. And within a conversation, there can be connection, intimacy, trust, and an opportunity for each of you to understand the other better. And also, there's an opportunity for your child to go through their own process of working out the response to their request. Because this is what we want as parents, is we want to raise children who grow up into adults who are self-actualized. We want them to know, this is who I am, this is what's important to me, these are my boundaries, I recognize your boundaries and I respect them, and I need to make positive decisions for my life. And yes, parenting is very much a process about bringing that about. And so therefore, the second thing in response to a potentially dangerous request is to ask a question back to them to open up the conversation. Thirdly, I think that there then comes a place to, as a human being and as an adult, to own your own emotional response. So you might say to them, you know, when you asked me this potentially dangerous request, when you asked me, I felt worried or anxious or scared. And what I'm needing is some reassurance, or I really want to know that you're going to be safe, or, you know, whatever that need is. And then to and then to say to them, you know, would you be willing to talk through my concerns with me? And depending on the nature of the relationship you have with your child, most humans would respond to that by saying, yes, okay, I'd like to hear your concerns. And if it's a stroppy teenager who you don't have a brilliant relationship with at the moment, you might get a stroppy response. But it's really, I think it's really unlikely, if you own your own emotional response and you're clear about what that's about, I think it's really unlikely that a child in this situation would just suddenly shut down. Because you've opened up the conversation, you have shared your own response to it, and at no point have you yet shut them down or criticized them or judged them or anything like that. So the third thing to do would be to say, you know, when I hear you asking me this, I feel scared, worried, anxious, because what I need is I want reassurance, or your safety is really important to me. And would you be willing to talk through my concerns with me? Then fourthly, and this possibly applies to younger children, perhaps like kind of 12 and under maybe, is as the parent to start thinking about, how can we make this request possible, but in a way that is less dangerous? So what are the playful responses, or the creative responses? What are the alternatives that I as the parent could offer to my child? And hopefully by this point you have a much clearer sense of what is the underlying need behind their potentially dangerous request. So coming up with these playful, creative, peaceful responses, alternatives, it's about remembering what the need is that we think they're trying to meet. Perhaps a need for attention, a need for excitement, a need for respect and trust from us. And say, you know, I still feel unsure about this potentially dangerous request, but how about this? And share an option, or, you know, is this something we could do together? Would you be willing to adapt the thing that you want to do by also, you know, doing this thing that would alleviate my concerns? So what we are doing is we're saying to the child, you know, I really want to say yes to who you are as an individual, and I want to support you as you become the architect of your own life. So as the parent, by putting forth these suggestions for playful, creative alternatives, we're helping what best for themselves to be able to explore things from other angles, and we have still not said no to them. What we're doing is we are saying yes over and over again to them as an individual, to being considerate of their request. We're saying yes to their needs. We're saying yes to their interests. And most importantly, we're saying yes to the relationship that we have with them, because above everything else, parents are most able to parent their children when there's a positive connection in place. And then my fifth reflection is simply that quite often the world creates its own limits, and the world will say no before the parent has to. And that limit might be financial limits, it might be geographical limits, it might be a practical limit, it might be a time factor that limits it. And so when we start talking to our child about this potentially dangerous request, and we start to explore how would they make it happen had they considered X, Y, and Z, the limits of money, time, geography, etc., present themselves. And so the child is then, oh, well, I don't have the money for it, or I could have the money for it, but I'd need to work these jobs and I'd need to save up for this long. And so our child is again equipped to start making these decisions for themselves, but they're not on their own, because we're right there with them and we're being part of this conversation with them. And these kind of natural limits that the world puts in place, they work with small children as well as older children as well as adult children. So it's a really useful tool that we have, that the reality of living does mean that we have to take those factors into consideration as we go about working out our choices in life. So those are five points when your child brings a potentially dangerous request to you. Firstly, is to remember that all behaviours have a positive intention behind them, and that intention is to try and meet a need. Secondly, to respond to their request with a question which opens up the conversation. So that, that's an interesting request, or I'm surprised by your request, but why is it important to you? What is it about it that appeals to you? How do you think you could make that happen? So that you start to have that conversation. Thirdly, as an adult, taking responsibility for your own emotions and communicating those clearly with your child by saying, when you make this request, this is what I feel and what I need is. And then asking, would you be willing to talk through my concerns with me? It starts to show your child that you trust them and that you value their thought process and you value their opinion. And then fourthly, it's about finding playful alternatives, creative alternatives, starting to look at the request from different angles to see how can we say yes to this possible. And fifthly, it's about recognizing that the world brings about its own natural limitations. And I think it's very easy for us as parents to often point out where the world is saying no, no, no. And then children grow up feeling very limited. Whereas actually, when we say yes to our child, they start to learn the limitations of the world for themselves, but in a way that becomes part of their attempts to find solutions and find ways to make it possible for them to live the life they want to live. And I just have one example that happened recently with my 8-year-old son. He's quite a feisty, wild one, a little bit like me in some ways. And we were going out to the car to drive somewhere. And he walked around to the driver's side, opened the door, and he said, "Can I drive?" And the initial kind of response that started to come out of me was, well, no, you can't. But I stopped it because I've learned over the years how to catch myself when I realize that there's a no coming up. I've learned how to catch that no before it happens. And I just took a split second, and I just thought, I can trust my instincts on this. This request to drive is about something that he needs. So I said to him, whilst getting into the passenger side, I said, "Oh, I would love for you to drive. Yes, please. It would be lovely to be a passenger." At which point he went, I can't drive. I don't have a license. I don't know how to drive. It's illegal, and got out of the driver's side and ran round, and we swapped. And that was the end of that. It didn't go anywhere else. But I think what I realized when I thought about that afterwards was that my instinct was right. Because even if he'd turned the key in the ignition, and even if he'd been able to get the car in gear, which I'm not sure he could have done, I know for a fact that the likelihood of being able to move that car anywhere was next to nothing. And really a potentially dangerous request of, can I drive the car today? Really didn't have any substance to it, because there were too many things in place that would actually be that. So I think that, yes, parenting's response is always about opening up space for conversation, opening up the space within your relationship to get to know each other more and to understand what's driving your child's preferences, what's driving their requests, what's leading them to want to go in the direction that they want to go in their life. And as you go on that journey with them, and you guide them and you nurture them and you facilitate them, the trust that they have for you really builds. And so there's increased connection, and your child knows that you are a safe place to come and explore these things with. So I hope that that's been informative and helpful. I would really love to answer any questions that you have, and you can put them in the comments, or you can contact me via the contact form on my website. Do tweet me at BeTheTree. I'm around and about the place. I'm also on Facebook, and I look forward to hearing from you. Bye-bye.